On Stone Hollow Road, FBI agent J.D. Reston drives with his colleague Sarah Moore to investigate a case. J.D. then stops in front of an old hotel and asks Sarah to do the questioning this time, so the woman knocks on the door. When no one answers, she looks around and finds some cans of paint, as well as a car with a new Virginia plate. Sarah immediately informs J.D. that they've got their guy. J.D. decides to let the unsub or unknown subject think they're leaving while calling for backup. However, they break into the hotel when they hear people screaming inside. The agents see dead animals hanging from the ceiling as they search for those who need help, eventually heading to the basement where they find the unsub dead with 3 of his victims. Sarah reports to the base that the situation is secure, while J.D. notices the shots fired on the ceiling. Unfortunately, a stranger comes into the room and stabs Sarah before exchanging bullets with her partner. In the end, all 3 collapse from their wound. But as it turns out, all this is just a simulation. In fact, the bodies that the FBI agents found in the basement are all mannequins, and the stranger who attacked them is their colleague. Afterward, the 2 face their instructor, Jake Harris, who's an experienced profiler. Harris points out the other pieces of evidence that indicate there's another attacker, like the different brands of cigarettes. He's quite unhappy that Sarah and JD didn't notice them. JD isn't either, and he just feels like Harris enjoys watching them fail. He's promptly corrected, as it's revealed that the authorities were able to apprehend the unsub in under 2 minutes without a shot fired, while Sarah and JD took 7 minutes, and one of them even died. Later, Harris reminds a group of FBI agents who are training to be profilers that their most lethal weapon isn't their firearm, but their brain. He also wants them to know that their final exercise will be on the island of Onega, wherein their simulation will be a test of their teamwork. That night, the agents observe customers in a bar to see how good they are when it comes to reading people. The other agents are impressed by Bobby Whitman's observations, but Nicole Willis impresses them even more. Lucas Harper bets he can get the phone number of the lady they're observing, but Bobby says he can do it faster. So, Bobby makes his move while Rafe Perry continues with their profiling. The cocky Bobby successfully gets the woman's number, leaving Lucas a little annoyed. On the other hand, Sarah notices how quiet Vince Sherman is, and discovers that he's learned he won't become a profiler because he saw Harris's recommendations on his desk. In addition, Harris told him he was not capable of the psychological commitment necessary for profiling work. Sarah won't become a profiler either. Vince feels bad about this, but all he can do is apologize for reading her file and advise her not to work too hard out there. On their way to Onega the following day, Harris introduces Detective Gabe Jensen to everyone. He's the resident profiler of the Philadelphia PD, who's given permission by the Attorney General to watch the FBI agents train. He's just there to observe, though, and not to participate. Once the agents reach the facility on the island, Harris reveals that the Navy built it for war game practice. There, he shows his subordinates Onega's features before sharing information about their target, the puppeteer. He's a serial killer who's killed 2 people on those streets. Tomorrow, they'll find a crime scene and receive their background dossiers. By 8 a.m. on Monday, Harris wants a full profile of this suspect, and he asks JD to be the team leader. As they continue the tour, Harris explains that the Navy uses the tank to simulate Arctic regions. That's what the nitrogen's for. Inside the facility, he shares where they can test blood and analyze fibers. Next, Harris lets everyone know where they can rest, eat, and shower, stressing they're 50 miles offshore. The point of this whole exercise is to remind the FBI agents that they're isolated, alone, and forgotten. That's what it's like to be inside the mind of a sociopath. Wishing his subordinates good luck, Harris eventually leaves on a chopper, giving the agents room to do what they need. JD asks Gabe how he was able to come with them, but the man refuses to share his war stories. At this point, Lucas and the others try to read the detective, but for Gabe, what they say about him tells him more about them. He believes Lucas has an addictive personality because of his little gambling tendencies, that Nicole is sleeping with one of the guys in that room, that JD takes charge of his team because he never had a leader in his life, and that Sarah cracks under pressure. Still, that's all the surface. Those traits are not who they are. Later that night, Lucas sits with Sarah outside and learns she's worried about failing to become a profiler. She believes that Harris thinks she can't get past something that happened to her. In turn, Lucas shares he lost both his parents when he was 10, and as a result, he grew up living a hard-knock life. All he wants to say is that people should confront their demons every day, but it doesn't mean they have to defeat them. In the bathroom, Nicole sneaks up on JD, and the 2 end up getting intimate. Harris is really tough on these agents, and for good reason. Being a profiler isn't for the faint of heart. It requires constant exposure to scenes that are unsettling at best and disturbing at worst, along with communicating extensively with the people who knew the victims. You can't just build a psychological profile of a criminal out of thin air. You have to really get into their mind, and that can be emotionally taxing for many. It's also an extremely high-stakes and high-pressure job that can make or break the investigation. This is why Harris is screening the hell out of these agents, though his methods can be a bit extreme. This is also why he has no faith in Sarah. Something traumatic has happened to her, and Harris believes it will hinder her from doing her job right. She's unlike Lucas, who, despite having faced some tragedies himself, opt to be unburdened by them and instead face his demons daily like he said. The next day, Sarah sees a dead cat with a badge hanging in the locker room. The others rush in when they hear her scream, wondering how Harris placed the animal there. JD then notices the broken watch stuck in its body, which shows 10 o'clock. Knowing Harris, JD thinks it's a sign of something. After that, They all explore the streets while JD lets everyone know that they'll be splitting into pairs. With cameras following their every move, Bobby and Rafe enter a diner to investigate. Elsewhere, Vince finds something inside a store and quickly alerts everyone. It's a dead woman, and just like the cat, she's strung up. For Lucas, the puppeteer has one heck of a signature. While Bobby checks the employee logs, JD instructs Sarah to check the body. Despite being reluctant, Sarah does as she's told and feels a bit uncomfortable. Bobby decides to go see if the unsub is still there since that's standard procedure. A displeased Vince notes they should have been allowed to bring their guns, but they all get distracted when music suddenly blasts from a toy radio that shows the time, 10 o'clock. When JD touches the toy, a part of it falls and topples dominoes, triggering some sort of mechanism. That mechanism causes a tank of helium to fall, making everyone panic. To their horror, the tank is actually mislabeled. It's filled with liquid nitrogen, which instantly freezes JD's legs. Just like that, their situation turns extremely dire. A desperate Nicole tries to help him, but the others stop her. They're scared that she might get hurt too. Unfortunately, it isn't long before JD's whole body freezes, and his colleagues can only watch as it shatters. JD's dead. Nicole breaks down into tears, while a shocked Rafe tries to convince himself that it was just a simulation. The distress weighs heavily on everyone, but the ordeal isn't over. No. Sarah realizes that the watch they found on the cat and the toy radio show the same time. Moments later, they carry JD's body back to base, where Bobby sympathizes with Nicole. Afterward, the agents discover that the phones in the facility aren't working. There's no signal either. Vince thinks that JD's death was an accident, but Nicole firmly believes that someone killed him. Furthermore, Gabe informs them that the watch on the billiard table wasn't there last night. Unlike the first two, this one shows 12 o'clock. As Lucas checks his watch and sees it's 10:30, Bobby recalls seeing a boat at the pier when they reach the island. Wasting no time, everyone heads to the boat to find the radio. However, on their way there, Lucas accidentally triggers an alarm that causes the boat to explode. Lucas, Bobby, and Sarah fall into the water, and for some reason, the woman freezes in place. Thankfully, Lucas is quick to save her. As Vince watches them from a distance, Lucas angrily refuses Gabe's help to get Sarah out of the water before assuring her she'll be okay. Understandably, the detective gets curious about what the deal is between Sarah and water. As tensions rise, Vince insists that Harris won't let them leave the island, but Bobby stresses that their instructor won't do anything as excessive as this. He's a company man after all. Whatever the case, Vince won't hesitate to protect himself with his gun. It goes where he goes. Even for someone like Harris, this is going too far. As far as everyone knows, JD is dead, and all the traps they're triggering are too dangerous to just be parts of the test. Instead, these FBI agents are trapped in this island with a killer. Could the killer be watching them, or could they be walking among them? The first two deaths, being that of the woman and the cat, were killed with a clear signature in mind, befitting of a killer with the alias, the puppeteer. But the pattern went straight to hell with JD's death and the boat's explosion. Although, a case could be made that all of those killing methods hinged on completely inhibiting the body. The woman and the cat were strung up and JD was frozen. As for the boat's explosion, the only way this pattern would hold water is if the killer was specifically targeting Sarah, and they had explicit knowledge that she would react that way when in water. In any case, it's still too early to make any assumptions about the killer's identity and motives, but the group doesn't have the luxury of time. They need to craft a profile of the killer quick, so they can predict what will happen so they can avoid certain death. With that, everyone breaks into the armory. They take everything they need, like handcuffs and more guns. They also check the map and take thermal imagers, which they use to scout the island. While the others are outside, Sarah tends to Lucas's wounds. Although the man is in pain, he still wants to make sure that Sarah is all right. This is where Sarah notices that it's only 20 minutes before 12, so they all gather in one place to talk. Will someone die at 12? They can't be sure. All they know is that someone left the watches and rigged the boat. Right now, Bobby wants to focus on the fact that there's a killer on the island who knows why they're there and where they'd be. The only problem is, there's no one on the island but them. Because of this, Sarah and the others prepare to draw their guns. Bobby asks everyone to calm down, but when Lucas enters the room, he points his firearm at Gabe and demands he get on the floor. He also shows his colleagues what he found in the detective's room, maps of the island and the buildings. Gabe tries to explain himself and gets up, but that only prompts the FBI agents to point their guns at him. Calmly, he states they got him all wrong before surrendering his weapon to Lucas. But before he can get on his knees, he suddenly loses consciousness. Bobby and Sarah realize there's something in their coffee, and in a matter of seconds, they all pass out. Hours pass, and the agents wake up one by one. Bobby quickly hits Gabe when he sees him crawling away and puts handcuffs on him, believing he killed JD. Gabe tries telling them why he has the maps, but instead, Nicole demands to know what he put in their coffee. This time, Gabe gets pissed and reminds them it was Rafe who made their coffee. Since Gabe is accusing Rafe of being a killer, Bobby pulls the man by the shirt and asks him to defend himself. To everyone's surprise, his head falls off, and Sarah notes that whoever killed him drained his blood. Soon, they see codes on the glass walls written using Rafe's blood, and they find more broken watches showing the time. 6 o'clock. This could mean that 2 people will die. Immediately, they handcuff Gabe to a pipe and question him about the next trap. but he insists he doesn't know anything because he's not the killer. Finally, Gabe reveals he's not a cop, but an investigator with the Department of Justice who was sent to investigate Harris. The Attorney General was hearing rumors about his methods, and there was talk that he was pushing trainees too far. Gabe also says he was sent to see how Harris works with the agents, and to put it simply, he prepared for his job by studying the island's maps. Unfortunately, no one believes him. Lucas instructs Vince to look after Gabe while he and the others check the codes with Sarah, who says they're looking at a 9-number sequence repeating itself. Lucas also wants to search for the trap, but Sarah makes it clear that the numbers could tell them where the trap might be. So, Lucas asks Bobby to help Sarah work the numbers before searching the building with Nicole. With 10 minutes left, the agents do their tasks. Eventually, Nicole and Lucas return to where Sarah and Bobby are, all while Gabe tries to convince Vince that he's not their guy. Then, Bobby realizes that 299,792,458 meters per second is the original measurement for light, prompting Sarah to turn off the lights. She uses a black light to see if there are hidden messages around, and sure enough, they discover that there were letters on the back of their jackets, which the killer probably wrote while they were sleeping, using some kind of powder that glows phosphorescently under blacklight. The letters are A, O, R, and T. At 6, Vince hears a noise outside the room and checks what it is, seeing that a water pipe broke. He calls out to his colleagues as he slowly approaches the pipe, but several fluorescent lights suddenly break and leave him trapped in the middle of the hallway. The water pipe completely breaks too, forcing him to leave his wheelchair and climb on an emergency ladder. Gabe watches as water fills the hallway, and because he's still handcuffed to another pipe, he can't do anything to help Vince while he's dangling from the ceiling. With the two of them about to be electrocuted, Gabe urges Vince to shut off the power in the storeroom. When Vince says he can't do it, Gabe tells him to give him his gun so he can do it himself. With no other choice, Vince tosses his gun to the investigator, who quickly shoots his handcuff before removing his jacket and using the pipes on the ceiling to get out of the room. He repeatedly shoots the wall beside Vince, before punching the bullet holes to make them bigger. With that, he's able to get to the other side of the hallway. Hearing the gunshots, the others check what's going on but are warned by Vince to stay out of the water. Thankfully, Gabe finally reaches the storeroom and successfully shuts off the power as Vince loses his grip. Once it's safe, Lucas and the other FBI agents check on Vince, who's already in his wheelchair. He tells them that Gabe saved his life, and understandably, the guy is pissed that they ganged up on him. It's safe to say that the agents are dealing with someone who has a twisted sense of entertainment. If the killer's only purpose was to kill, there's no need for all these bells and whistles. And if it's attention they wanted, they could have just blown up the island and disposed of the people there all at once. They'd still be noticed by the entire nation, especially since the facility here belongs to the Navy. But no, the killer enjoys watching them suffer and desperately look for clues that might save their lives. They probably get off on having some kind of intellectual superiority over a group of FBI agents who can't figure out what they're dealing with to save their lives. Pun intended. It could be for revenge, it could be for simple entertainment, or even something deeper. The only one they could reasonably suspect is Gabe, though he seems to be transitioning back to their good graces after saving Vince. Still, the agents can't let their guard down. As proven already, the killer is smart, so if it's Gabe, it's possible that he was only forced to save Vince since he was about to die too. That aside, Bobby looks for a way to turn off the water, but he inadvertently sets off the killer's trap, resulting in 3 arrows in his body. This is bad. They're dropping like flies, but they're not any closer to figuring out who the killer is. Gabe then recalls that they found 2 watches, proving that the killer really intended to kill 2 people with 2 traps. Shortly after, Nicole finds another broken watch that stopped at 8 o'clock. Now, the group's got an hour and a half before another one of them drops dead. They check the dead agents' jackets and see more letters, eventually getting the word Croatoan, like the colony. Vince explains that the island where they are now is one of the first sites settled by the Europeans in the New World. In the 16th century, England sent a ship of over 100 settlers there to colonize it, and they built their town on Roanoke Island. 2 years later, a supply ship discovered that the colony had vanished without a trace, and the word Croatoan was found carved in a tree. After 500 years, no one knows where the missing people have gone. For Sarah, that's the message. An island full of people vanish forever. She believes the killer isn't after the FBI but infamy. After their discussion, they gather some samples of the powder from the jackets, examine them, and check the watches, as well as the dead bodies. Later, Nicole finds dried blood under Rafe's nails, all while Sarah stares at the time. They then take blood samples from each of them to see if there will be a match, and they all agree to put their guns on the table. When Vince refuses, Gabe forcefully takes his gun away, and even pushes him so hard that he falls off his wheelchair. After that, they check the results and discover that the unknown subject is Sarah. It's her blood under Rafe's nails. In a flash, Gabe and the others grab their weapons and point them at her. Nicole also pushes her to the ground, but Lucas doesn't think it makes sense that Sarah is the killer. To this, Vince reveals that she wasn't going to pass as a profiler, so Sarah argues that he wasn't either. But the difference between them, as Vince states, is that he never had a younger sister who got drowned and violated. That's what happened to Sarah's sister, who wasn't saved by the FBI. They also didn't manage to catch the killer, so how could they catch her, when she's so much smarter than everyone? While Sarah swears that she's not the killer, Vince insists that she wanted all of them on the island, dead and underwater, so they'd suffer. With 10 minutes left, Gabe and the agents interrogate Sarah about the trap, and Nicole even slaps her when she insists she doesn't know. She can't help but be emotional because of everything that happened. And in the end, after threatening to shoot her colleagues because she doesn't know who to trust, Nicole leaves to be by herself. With her gone, Sarah makes another case for herself. They're saying that she's killing for vengeance, when in reality, the killer is very impersonal. What they're doing with the rules and deadlines is just proving their superiority. Gabe, however, just thinks that the unsub's skill is to appear wounded and hurt to fool everyone. Hearing this, Sarah realizes that the deaths were never random. The killer has planned to kill them through their skills and weaknesses. JD died because he was out front, leading them, and he was always out front. Rafe was a coffee junkie, and Bobby was their Mr. Fix-It. All this time, the killer's been profiling them. At 8 o'clock, Nicole sees a cigarette pack come out of a vending machine. Meanwhile, the others discuss their strengths and weaknesses to figure out how they'll be killed. In Sarah's case, her sister was killed, and she hasn't been in the water since because she always sees her there. It dawns on her that that's the killer's signature, and as a result, Nicole crosses her mind. Unknown to them, Nicole is smoking a cigarette laced with acid, and when Lucas and Gabe find her, she's already dying. After reporting what happened, they suddenly hear Harris taunting them from the speakers. He's been watching them all along. Finally, Lucas releases Sarah and asks who's coming with him to hunt the man down. Since Vince refuses to join them, Gabe handcuffs his wheelchair to a table before going with Sarah and Lucas. Vince then leaves his wheelchair and takes the elevator to the basement, dragging his body across the floor until he reaches the freezer. There, he takes Rafe's magazine and puts it in his own gun, only to be trapped inside the room when the door slowly closes. Outside, Harris's message continues to play on the speakers, asserting they're all weak. The trio enters the same store where the female victim was found, not expecting they'd find Harris dead and strung up in the basement. Alongside him are 2 dead FBI agents. On the monitors, they see Harris's recorded message, the one playing on the speakers. It shows the wounded instructor talking to someone behind the camera, who eventually killed him. The unsub knew that he never left the island. Sarah notices that Harris is wearing 3 watches, which are all set for that moment. As if on cue, Harris's body moves like a marionette because of a mechanism connected to a radio. They immediately turn it off, and once again, they start suspecting each other of being the killer. The men point their guns at each other, but when the power goes out, they all go outside to find the real killer. Unfortunately, the darkness makes their situation even harder, and they just end up shooting the moving dummies around them. While Sarah manages to hide under a bus, Gabe repeatedly shoots Lucas. Through a small emergency door, Sarah gets inside the bus. Gabe hears her and follows her, but the minute he steps inside the vehicle, the woman escapes. When Gabe realizes this, he immediately follows Sarah. In the freezer, Vince pushes Rafe's body off the gurney and gets on top of it to open the door. He uses his gun to hit the emergency button, and once the door opens, he crawls back to the elevator. He knows he's no longer alone since he heard a noise seconds earlier. Inside the elevator, Vince prepares to shoot as he sees a shadow coming his way, but his gun backfires on him, and it isn't long before Sarah finds his body when the elevator reaches the 2nd floor. That's where Gabe ambushes her. The two then engage in a fight, believing the other is the killer. And although Sarah's able to pull out her gun, Gabe successfully distracts her by kicking the table toward her before knocking her out. Surprisingly, Lucas shows up and fights with Gabe. The two exchange punches and kicks all around the place and fall off the stairs. But a now awake Sarah comes to Lucas's rescue and hits Gabe with a fire extinguisher before he can get away. After that, Sarah helps Lucas and learns he's wearing a bulletproof vest. She also reveals that she changed the clock back 15 minutes after Bobby died, knowing that the killer would fix it, and she was right. That's not all. She also put the phosphorescent powder from the jackets on the clock, which means that the unsub's hands will glow if they use a blacklight. Wasting no time, Sarah checks Gabe's hands for traces of the powder but doesn't find any. Instead, she sees traces on Lucas's left hand. With his secret revealed, Lucas shows Sarah all the things he's hiding inside his jacket, which he used to trigger his traps. A horrified Sarah tries to flee, but he stops her with ease, all while revealing that he was the one who killed his parents. Really, he was disappointed that not one detective even considered that he was responsible for their deaths, and he was disappointed because nothing matched his first experience, his first kill. So, he started looking for worthy prey and joined the FBI. It was real simple to set everyone on edge. The key to effective illusion is misdirection, and all he needed was an opportunity. The coffee break gave him the chance he needed to rig a few little surprises. Lucas also states that everyone was so predictable. Nicole with her cigarettes, Vince, who wouldn't go anywhere without his gun, Bobby, who couldn't resist fixing anything that's broken, and Harris, who just had to stay and watch. Lucas admits he thought Gabe would be a problem, but he knew Sarah would deal with the guy. That said, Lucas knows that Sarah's other weakness is him, but before he can do anything, Sarah lets herself fall down the stairs and runs away. Unfortunately, Lucas immediately catches up to her and tries to drown her. Sarah then stops moving when she notices Nicole's body that fell there earlier, making Lucas think she's already dead, but she grabs that opportunity to kick him into the water. While underwater, she disarms Lucas before swimming toward Nicole to get her gun. For the next few seconds, the two struggle to shoot each other, but when Lucas swims to the surface to catch his breath, Sarah finally shoots him. Once he's cornered, Lucas reminds Sarah that they've got her blood under Rafe's nails. her fingerprints on the fire extinguisher, and her bullet in his neck. But suddenly Gabe arrives and throws a watch at his feet, telling him his time is up. Refusing to surrender, Lucas attempts to pick up the gun Sarah made him drop moments ago, but the woman doesn't hesitate to shoot him again. In the morning, Sarah and Gabe flag down a Navy helicopter to leave Onega, and the woman wonders if the FBI will let her become a profiler now. In the end, it became a battle of smarts between a very unwell killer who saw the lives of people as games for him to play, and a genuinely brilliant woman who spent the better half of her life defined by her sister's death. And yet, it's Sarah who emerged victorious as she confronted her demons in the water, the very same place where she thought she'd never go back to again. Lucas just got a little too confident. Since he easily got into the FBI and manipulated his colleagues, he thought that nothing would ever ruin his plans. It never crossed his mind that his meekest colleague would be the one to defeat him. Lucas enjoyed controlling them all, especially Sarah, who's always been close to him. But that's where his mistake lay. He didn't pay attention to the weakling and believed he got everything under control, only for said weakling to beat him at his own game. Though Sarah was too late and everyone but her and Gabe died, she at least proved that mentally, she might just have what it takes to be a profiler.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.